The uncanny is that class of the terrifying which leads back to something long known to us, once very familiar. Sigmund Freud. In honor of the season, I want to talk about horror and Gothic literature today and what makes it so great, according to Sigmund Freud. Sigmund Freud was a great lover of literature. He often used stories like Hamlet or the Brothers Karamazov to explain some of his theories, and he wrote a very important essay in 1919 called The Uncanny that is still used today as a lens through which to analyze Gothic literature. I have linked Sigmund Freud's text The Uncanny in English in the description box below if you want to read it in the translation by Alix Strachey. Let me just quickly say before we go on that if you're new to my channel, I'm Maria and I study comparative literature at the University of Vienna. So if you like my work, I hope you'll stick around. And I also hope you check out my course on French literature. And if you just want to support the channel financially, I also really appreciate that. My Ko-fi account is always linked in the description box as well. Let's get into it now. Let me begin this presentation with a photograph. What do you feel when you look at it? I immediately noticed the carpet, the slightly off-center light bulb, the man with a faint, kind of hard-to-read smile. Like, why is he just standing there in the middle of the room? So somehow the scene is familiar, a hotel room, but something is off, right? There's a little bit of discomfort, at least for me, in this picture. So the concept of the uncanny, which we're going to talk about today, helps explain exactly that feeling, the uncanny. That feeling is a lot more subtle than just jump scares and monsters or something. It's about how art and the human psyche interact and reinforce each other, and how what's hidden in us comes to light through it. And the photograph I've just shown you is from Diane Arbus. It's called The Backwards Man in His Hotel Room. You might have noticed his feet by now. Just as a side note, I know that this photograph really inspired Hanya Yanagihara to write A Little Life, and that's how I found it. Let's talk about where the concept of the uncanny actually comes from. The term was first coined in 1906 by psychiatrist Ernst Jentsch, and Jentsch said that the uncanny arises when we have doubts whether an apparently animate thing is really alive, or conversely, whether a lifeless object might not in fact be animate. A good example, I think, is if you've ever seen someone do a robot dance and they do it really, really well, and it just looks like they're not a person anymore, they're moving like a robot. And so you're not sure whether that human is actually alive. Another example of that concept is in Dracula. Dracula, of course, being one of the quintessential horror stories. There is the scene where Jonathan first sees the court laying in what seems to be a coffin, and he says that, quote, "There in one of the great boxes, of which there were 50 in all, on a pile of newly dug earth, lay the court. He was either dead or asleep. I could not say which, for eyes were open and stony, but without the glassiness of death, and the cheeks had the warmth of life through all their pallor. The lips were as red as ever, but there was no sign of movement, no pulse, no breath, no beating of the heart." An excellent example of what Jentsch meant with the term uncanny. Freud, however, talked about this phenomenon in his article from 1919 and gave this theory his own very interesting spin. He says that the uncanny is the feeling of eeriness and dread that arises when something that was once familiar but is now hidden or repressed returns or is revealed. So the uncanny only works because there's something that is already known to us, like children's toys or googly eyes or something. But we thought we left those things in the past. We thought we don't believe in inanimate objects being animate anymore. And we thought that things don't touch us anymore. But then we come up to a text like Dracula, and it pulls back out of us that perception of the world that we have had when we were children. He says that, quote, "The uncanny is that class of the terrifying which leads back to something long known to us, once very familiar." And that's why it's creepy in a movie when a children's toy suddenly moves, or we see the same number over and over again. It's the magical thinking of childhood that was very normal to us, but now we are adults and we think we're beyond it. Our thinking used to be a lot more flexible and suggestive, and now that we're adults and this feeling is coming up again, it feels odd. Because we're not used to it. We're not used to letting the irrational be a part of our lives anymore. Oh my gosh, the light. We just moved the clocks back and I'm not used to this new filming window yet. Back to the uncanny. It makes a lot of sense, I think, to reflect on the fact that we're living in the 21st century and supposedly the Enlightenment has happened. We have come so far in overcoming mythical thinking. We think that the intellect will conquer everything, and, you know, that no traumas of the past or religion or any kind of mythical thinking have an influence on our very rational lives anymore. Yet, we're fascinated with horror stories and with zombie and sci-fi movies. Something in us, I think, cannot just give up the supernatural, and we get our fixes through sci-fi movies and vampire novels. And if those movies and novels are any good, they usually play with that which is secretly familiar to us. The images and the myths that we have carried with us either since childhood or since our collective childhood, right? Since the dawn of humankind. In the text, Freud explains what he means exactly by talking about the etymology of the word unheimlich in German. As a reminder, etymology is the study of where words come from, and the word unheimlich in German could be translated as unhomely. So it's the opposite of heimlich, which means that which is known, homely, or familiar. Freud doesn't simply say that that which is unheimlich is unknown, and that's what makes it scary. He says that, again, uncanny things are actually familiar, but they're suppressed. That which is uncanny is a part of the subconscious making its way to the forefront of consciousness. Heimlich has another meaning in German, though. It means that which is secret. So one could say that the uncanny is heimlich, meaning secretly familiar. So again, for the uncanny to exist, there needs to be familiarity, just like in the picture I showed you in the beginning. The fact that the man has human features and there's a room with objects that we know, it all makes it so that we're creeped out a lot more when something small, like his feet, seem off. If it was a picture of a made-up alien figure with objects that we've never seen, it would maybe scare us, but it wouldn't give us this more complex feeling. 51 years after Freud wrote this article, robotics professor Masahiro Moore coined the term the uncanny valley. I found this particularly fascinating because this concept connects Freud's idea with the development of robots, machines, and artificial intelligence. And how he came up with this theory is that as a professor, he was working with robots on a daily basis, and he noticed that the more human-like robots acted, the more positively people reacted to them. So if a robot had eyes drawn on them, people found that really cute. if they could laugh, it was well perceived. But when the robots got too close to being very human-like, people suddenly found them revolting. The emotional response of humans seeing something human-like but not quite human is one of dread and disgust. I don't know if you've seen any of those videos of robots nowadays that really do and act and, have a mimic like humans. And maybe you've had that feeling that it creeps you out. You're like, whoa, I thought for a moment that was real. And that moment of kind of dread, he calls the uncanny valley. You can see it here in this graph. So he says that when things become more human-like, we feel more and more familiar and comfortable with the object until it reaches a certain point, right before it becomes almost indistinguishable from human beings. And our positive emotions towards the object suddenly dip into a valley of uncomfortable feelings. Some think that this is a protection in the human psyche to distinguish what is real from what is fake. And some experts think that uncanny valley feeling will disappear in a while when we're getting used to robots being all around us. So why should we care about the uncanny as readers? I think because it gives us a lens. So next time when you're reading something and it gives you a little bit of a shiver, maybe you can ask yourself, what is secretly familiar to me in the story? And maybe you can see it as something that is a little bit more than just spooky, but actually a very complex psychological, structural thing going on there. So I'd love to hear what you think about this concept. I know Freud is not always received well by readers. Do let me know if this makes any sense to you, or if you have any alternative theories, whether you've had that feeling recently and which book it was that you read. I held this presentation about the uncanny a couple of semesters ago when I was in Paris. It was a little bit more complex. There were more examples, and we did a close reading of E.T.A. Hoffmann's Der Sandman, The Sandman. But I just cannot get the French word for the uncanny out of my mind. It's l'inquiétante étrangeté. And I said that so many times during that it will just not leave my mind anymore. And how long and descriptive that word is, I feel is just emblematic of the French language at large. Okay, thank you for listening. I hope to hear from you, and I'll see you again very soon. Bye bye.